Chapter 41, Trying to Be More. Sitting in the back of an unmarked police car, Renee headed down the I-10 freeway toward the federal courthouse in Los Angeles to meet with some FBI agents and assistant U.S. attorneys. He was in leg irons, waist chains, and handcuffs, but his eyes were free to roam. It was one of those rare opportunities he had to see the outside world. The roadway was congested, but he liked it. The slow-moving cars gave him a chance to study the distraught faces of motorists cursing the traffic or barking into their cell phones. He saw one woman behind the wheel good-naturedly singing away, but for the most part, the expressions were bitter and hurried. Yet, for a man whose days would end in a concrete enclosure, it was real life. Those people don't realize they are blessed just to be in traffic, even to drive an old beat-up car, Renee said. I don't think they realize that. Take the moment in and say this is a beautiful day. Each day is another chance to accomplish something positive, just to embrace life. The cop car cruised down an off-ramp and turned onto a busy downtown street. There was a young mother walking with her child and a man strolling with his dog. Hungry customers waited at a little greasy spoon taco cart parked at the edge of the curb. Renee took it all in. These things strike me as life. People pass it by every day, taking it for granted. The detectives pulled up to a stoplight. A black homeless man and his girlfriend stood on the corner with a shopping cart full of junk and a sign that read, "We'll work for food." Their eyes met Renee's as he looked out the window at them, and the homeless guy gave him a little wave. He felt sorry for them. Then he started to wonder if they were really poor people or just crack addicts hustling change for their next rock of cocaine. How can you determine that, he thought. Caring people became jaded when they realized that their donated dollar really buys a chunk of dope instead of food. It was just a hustle. Renee also knew that there were people in and out of law enforcement who were thinking the same thing about his defection from the mob. The unmarked car pulled into the underground garage at the federal building. The trip had taken about an hour across the freeway and traversing downtown streets. I had a blast, said Renee, who wondered, as he witnessed people's hurried lives, if they really understood how blessed they were to be alive. Rene Enriquez knew that it's highly likely he will die behind bars after spending most of his life in prison. He had served more than 18 years on a 15-to-life sentence, and there's almost no chance of parole for him, considering his notorious mafia background. Now, through his cooperation with law enforcement, he was hopeful that someday he might be released from custody. He did not want to end up the same way as his mentor, Daniel Black Dan Barella, who died alone in his cell on January 17, 2007. Guards at the U.S. Penitentiary in Victorville, California, watched on surveillance cameras as the 61-year-old mafioso was released from his solitary confinement to take a shower. A half hour after Barella returned to his cell, officers found him down on the floor with no pulse, not breathing, and vomit coming from his mouth and nose. He was taken by ambulance to the Victor Valley Community Hospital emergency room. 4 armed federal agents guarded the doorway to his room when he was officially pronounced dead of a heart attack at 11:25 a.m. The coroner's report indicated that Barella had a history of chronic heroin abuse, and toxicology tests found traces of opiates in his system. It also noted an upper arm tattoo of a skeleton wearing a sombrero that appears to be death. On March 12, 2007, Renee's older brother Mark died from complications due to AIDS after years of intravenous heroin abuse. He was serving a parole violation at the California Institute for Men in Chino when he fell to the floor in his cell in a convulsive state and never regained consciousness. Sadly, Mark died while still a slave to the needle. He refused to go to rehab. It was like he wasn't my brother anymore. Mark wasn't Mark, lamented Renee. He was a handsome man who wasted away. He never worked and was in and out of prison his whole life, mostly for drug-related thefts. The brother I want to remember is the happy-go-lucky guy who loved to go fishing with me, always got the girl, and never wanted to hurt anyone. He was my charismatic big brother, my hero. Mark died in prison as an AIDS-riddled junkie. In the end, Mark was in a coma on life support for several days before family members gave doctors permission to pull the plug. His father, mother, sister, and younger brother John, who overcame a drug problem of his own, turned his life around and was working as a surgical technologist. All came to visit Renee after Mark's death. Tears fell like raindrops. I never cried like that before with my family, said Renee. I hadn't seen my sister Perla in 18 years, and as soon as I saw her, I broke down crying. Like so many families racked by the evils of drug addiction, many of the tears fell as symbols of what could have been. Renee has been clean and sober since November 2003 and is determined, at the very least, not to just die another jailhouse junkie. About 2.5 years after he dropped out of the Mexican Mafia, Renee, for the first time in his prison career, willingly participated in a mental health evaluation with a state forensic psychologist. Dr. Elaine L. Murrah asked him, "What would you change if you could alter only one thing in your life?" His answer was drug abuse. Without drug use, the possibilities would have been endless. I think drug abuse is a portal to the Mexican Mafia. He no longer wants to be a drug addict. I have to be more, said Renee. Than the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I don't want to kill anymore ever again. My greatest desire is to be a better man. I want my sons to someday be able to say that their father was a good person who made a lot of terrible mistakes but finally learned that I ultimately had some positive impact, made a difference. In the fall of 2004, gang investigators at Pelican Bay State Prison froze the inmate trust accounts of 14 Mexican Mafia members in an effort to stop mobsters from using the state to launder drug profits. The documents had been sealed by a Superior Court judge pending an investigation, but MA member Raul Huerosherm Leon led the list with $23,000 in his account, one of the two carnales with more than $20,000 in trust accounts. 2 others had more than $10,000, and 7 other members had accounts ranging from $1,700 to $5,200. The trust accounts were designed for inmates to keep a few $100s on hand to buy toiletries and canteen food items. Gang specialist Devin Hawks believed that MA members had been laundering millions of dollars of illegally gained profits through their prison trust accounts. Investigators wanted the courts to seize the ill-gotten profits. In 2006, about 200 top prison gang members were moved into the One Shore corridor at Pelican Bay to disrupt gang communications. There, the isolated mafiosi were separated from the camaradas who normally did their dirty work. All mail was monitored and stamped so it could be traced from prison to prison, allowing for gangsters and their accomplices to be prosecuted for ordering hits or setting up drug deals through the mail. A few Mexican Mafia members had prison visits cut off altogether, and several MA wives were marked for prosecution for aiding and abetting in mob business. Devin Hawks said that Rene Enriquez was the instigator in it. The measures to disrupt the Mafia business moving forward. Rene also worked with representatives of the greater Los Angeles Catholic Archdiocese to educate human rights and prison reform groups about La M. He said that well-meaning leaders of civic organizations often do not understand who they are dealing with when it comes to the Mexican Mafia. These groups may believe they are promoting good works when they support inmate peace talks or hunger strikes by sending letters, faxes, or emails to prison officials, but the truth often lies somewhere else. Rene said that the Mafia utilizes the legitimacy and power of churches and prison reform groups only to further the interests of the mob. Prison administrators often succumb to the pressures generated by these valid organizations that are in fact doing their bidding of evil without even knowing it. Anything we, La M, touch, we corrupt. Human rights advocates complain about cruel and unusual punishment without realizing these guys in here in the shoe are really killers. Put 5 of them together and somebody's going to fall dead on the floor. These are really cynical, cold, calculating, brutal murderers. MA people are beyond redemption. Do-gooders should run from them like their hair is on fire. Rene Enriquez knew that the Mexican Mafia is glorified in the minds of tens of thousands of young people, just in Southern California, and he wanted to change that perception. Maybe I can't help older people because they have already chosen their path in life, said Rene, but I can help kids. He was hopeful that his telling of the ugly truth would discourage others from making the mistakes that he made. While in California State Prison in Lancaster, he helped start a program called Prisoners Reaching Out to educate children and teens, Protect. It's a prison-based project run by ex-prison gang members who use videotape messages and in-person lectures at the prison site to keep young people away from drugs and gangs. In October 2007, Rene qualified by the court as a Mexican Mafia expert testified for federal prosecutors against Laeme member and associates in what was the first ever RICO prosecution against gang members in San Diego. He was nervous for days prior to his testimony. It was so difficult, a personal struggle. I was raised not to cooperate with authorities. Even though I had been doing that, my subconscious was nagging at me. He had never before personally testified in a criminal trial against a member of the mob, or anyone else for that matter. Sitting on the witness stand, I started swallowing with a lump in my throat. My voice was shaky. I said to my mind, "Don't let me break down here." It was the most difficult undertaking I've ever experienced. Renee was on the verge of tears when Assistant U.S. Attorney Todd Robinson asked, "Is this difficult for you?" Renee started stuttering and was afraid to blink, thinking that it would unleash the tears that were building up in his eyes. He looked over at the jury and saw a middle-aged black woman. She saw the water in my eyes and she felt what I was feeling. I'm testifying against my former brothers. He turned his entire torso toward the jurors and said, "I'm sorry. I'm so nervous." The courtroom, packed with other prosecutors, FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, and other cops, were silent. Federal Prosecutor Robinson's mother, also in the gallery, would later tell her U.S. Attorney's son that Renee came across as very sincere. The one Mexican Mafia member on trial was Ricardo Gato Martinez. He was the boyfriend of the controversial Barrio Logan social worker, Rachel Ortiz. She and Gato had once come to visit Renee in LA County Jail years earlier. Renee, looking the defendant straight in the eye, testified that Gato was a well-known high-ranking member of MA, with 30 years in the organization. During Renee's 5 days of testimony, he remembered Gato would look at me grandfatherly. I felt compassion for him. He was overweight and gray and looked old. I felt sorry for him, and I felt I was somehow killing him. Federal prosecutors at the conclusion of the 2-month trial ended up with 7 convictions, Gato and 6 Mafia associates. They were found guilty of numerous racketeering offenses, including murder, conspiracy to commit murder, drug dealing, and money laundering. Weeks before the trial, 2 others had pleaded guilty to similar charges, including Laeme's murderous Raul, Weddle Sherm Leon. "I look forward to testifying against Weddle Sherm," said Renee. "He killed people for petty reasons, ordered executions for the slightest of reasons." After the racketeering trial, an FBI supervisor told Renee, "You should be proud of yourself." Another told Renee that he testified better than an agent. And yet, another said that he sounded like a college professor on the stand. Shortly afterward, Renee agreed to speak at a training session for more than 24 federal agents and prosecutors in San Diego. He felt good about it. Renee Enriquez now has a new life in WITSEC, a witness protection program for cooperating inmates who are still locked up. Every day for 17 years, as a carnal, I worried about mafia politics, hidden motives, visiting room posturing, enemies, indictments, and being placed on the lista. I know I am a priority hit, but it doesn't bother me anymore. Now I'm at peace. I'm not looking over my shoulder. If I do go somewhere and get killed, then I live by the sword and I died by the sword. That's the way it is. But to my knowledge, no one has been murdered inside the WITSEC program. Now I really don't have to worry about the opinions or whims of MA members who want to just kill just to make themselves look good. I feel liberated from that. In a sense, I am free. I feel good about myself. It's okay to be weak. My weakness is my strength. Gang life, learned Renee, is like falling into an abyss. It's no life, or rather, it's a life with no future. A life peering through steel bars and hoping to get a glimpse of something new. It's never there. What is there is the always lurking possibility, when an inmate does step outside his cell, that his last breath will be stolen quickly into a burst of brutality. Being locked up in a prison cell and dying a violent death are not exactly great options, but those are the overriding choices for an active gang member. Life can be so much more. Meanwhile, Rene Enriquez sits on the edge of his thinly mattressed bunk in a small cell, and his mind races with regrets. There is a new woman in his life, an old friend he married several years after dropping out of the Mexican Mafia, but he gets to see her only during visiting hours a couple of days a week. Other relatives, busy with their own lives, rarely come to see him. He eats when others tell him to eat. The lights go out, not when he wants to sleep, but when the state decides it's time. His movements are restricted by a heavy metal door that spans the entrance to the modern-day cave in which he lives. He accepts that. If I have to die here in prison, then I die here. But I don't want to die in prison. I want to die at home with my wife and family nearby, next to my dog. I want to be a regular guy, even for just one day. The black hand is still tattooed boldly on his chest, but it now reminds him of what he was, not what he is trying to be.